His life was a testament to his dedication to the people of South Africa. The former Reserve Bank governor and finance minister died at the age of 65 last night after a short illness. The ANC's struggle stalwart became the country's first black governor in 1999, a role he served for a decade. So as we reflect on his life and times, we now speak to the former statistician-general of the country, Pali Lehohla, who is joining us this morning. Former SG, a very good morning to you. Thank you so much for making time for us. Your reflections upon the news that Tito Mboweni has passed on.
Yes, it was rather shocking. I mean, I woke up at about 3 o'clock to start doing some work. And suddenly I saw this news flash that Tito Mboweni has passed on after a very short illness. You start looking at authenticating some of this and you find that it was true. Condolences to his children and his family.
Yeah.
And there are many who loved him, indeed.
I wonder...
I mean, he was a...
Okay, no, you can go ahead. You can go ahead.
Yes, I'm saying he was a fantastic man. Of course, he had this innate stubbornness in him that irritated. But he, as an intellectual, he was quite a great guy. As a politician, as an economist, and as his later years after retiring as a chef of Mahuba's Kloof, he took on to some interesting hobby. That kept people in stitches. And I think he was a person who continuously connected.
Yeah. From your end, I don't know, was there ever a moment, perhaps when he was studying in Lesotho, that you got a moment to get in touch with him? Or can you take us back to the first time that you met Tito Mboweni?
No, I was 2 years ahead of him, and I think when he arrived, I was almost going towards the end of my career at the university. And of course, when you are there, there isn't any medicine that says get in touch with this person because he'll be a greater person in the future. These things happen in that way. You only meet later in life. In fact, my only experience with him was much later in life as a person who was already working. I tried my luck at being the head of statistics South Africa in 1996, and he was in that panel that interviewed me and settled on making me to come to head office at Stats SA, of course, in preparation to take over in 2000. I think that was a plan. So my first encounter with him was at that point in time. As students, we never really crossed paths that much.
Yeah.
One can observe the progressive laws as the Minister of Labor and that were enacted under his watch. I think that was a great moment. And although they have been challenged at the moment, I think the laws will stick because they were based on very sound reasoning. So I think his contribution there should go a long way in sustaining the democracy of South Africa.
Yeah.
They have been sustained, yes.
What was your observation around how he was able to deal with the stats that were coming out of Stats SA? And when you see the MPC making its announcements around the repo rate and so forth, do you think or believe that he was truly in tune? I know that one of the issues that you had raised before was, at least from an administrative side, when it comes to the state, that there was a lack of actually dealing with what the statistics are telling us about the country.
Indeed, I think, well, from the Reserve Bank has been an ardent user of the numbers. In fact, when a decision by government, which is entitled for its policy, and including the Reserve Bank, to decide on inflation targeting, mine as a statistician-general was to give them the numbers that should go into the basket, the conditions where they shouldn't be that volatile, they shouldn't be shouldn't be part of the administered prices, in order that they could actually target the core inflation. So they religiously stuck to using those numbers that around which they targeted inflation. So the Reserve Bank, and particularly Mboweni, was quite hawk-eyed on the numbers, which brings me to one encounter that I had with him. When I started at Stats SA as the statistician-general, the economic statistics was in real dire straits. Well, I had started in Stats around 1983, and then in 1996 I came to head office. And in 2000, I got appointed as the head of the organization. And Mark Ocken had done quite a lot of work of transforming the numbers, but transforming the systems. But what was important was now the quantums, which didn't make a lot of sense. So I had to get on top of that. And I had to inform all the stakeholders, Trevor Manuel and Maria Ramos at Treasury, that I'm taking on the economic statistics. So I was on my way to go and inform Tito Mboweni that we are tackling these economic statistics. Little did I know that he was expecting something different. So we were welcome at the Reserve Bank, and he was quite excited. He thought, I'm sure, that I'm coming with what he expected. So I gave him all this story about how we are going to transform economic statistics from manufacturing to prices to that. And then I said, well, I'm coming to inform you because you are an important stakeholder. So when you see these numbers change, know that they change because we are doing something around them. They cannot remain the same. So as we stepped out with the current statistician-general, that was back in 2002, as we stepped out with the current statistician-general out of Tito Mboweni's office, he jumped to the door and said, oh statistician-general, you know, they say something that worries me. I said, what is it? He said, oh, the producer price index does very well. It's very stable. It does what is expected. But the CPI is yawning away from this. Have you ever attended to it? So I said, oh, my God. Governor, there's nothing wrong with the CPI, but I'll check. So it was around the same time as the meetings that happened in Washington. And Trevor Manuel came straight to my office and said, hey, what is happening to the CPI? I said, Minister, there's nothing wrong with this. But I'll do the runs. And then when I do the runs, I saw the horror. And we had to fix the CPI, and it needed attention. And we really worked on the CPI to get it all done and fixed.
Yeah.
So that was my encounter. So he was one of those people that was watching the numbers and would cringe when they don't make sense.
Yeah. Earlier on, I was speaking to Ronald Lamula, now, of course, Minister of International Relations, but I was asking him to reflect on his tenure when he was still with the ANC Youth League. Tito Mboweni was the Reserve Bank governor, and Trevor Manuel was the finance minister. And he speaks about how, at the time, they believed that Tito Mboweni, as well as Trevor Manuel, were too conservative in their approach and understanding around what is required to take the country to a higher trajectory in terms of its economic activity. What's your reflection around the approach that Tito Mboweni had taken when it comes to finances? We speak a lot about fiscal discipline, but the impact of that fiscal discipline sometimes.
Well, I had an encounter with him at the ETC, Economic Transformation Committee, in 2019. It was just after they published this document around the transforming the South African economy. And when we looked at all the numbers with all regard, the numbers were never going to move the needle, unfortunately. Absent in the assertion or their estimates of how things will move forward was basically how will that affect unemployment, poverty, and inequality. And as far as employment was concerned, their estimates was 1 million jobs from then 2019 to 2030 over a period of 10 years. I mean, it was a joke. One still has to say that the macroeconomic system that we have is not going to deliver the results that we need. I doubt if, however, Tito would have allowed for the two-pot system because I think he was a lot more reasonable in exacting accountability and ensuring that people cannot be made poor. I doubt if he would have allowed this two-pot system. But in as far as the macroeconomic plan that they had and they presented in 2019, which is the same platform that we are using now, moving forward as a country, those things are not going to deliver, unfortunately. I mean, when we at Inlametu, we modeled, and it was on the basis of the modeling that was done by ADRS, and we were there at the ETC. Asghar Delzadeh was delivering his assignment, which was given by Davis, and in place was now Minister, the one of Economic Affairs, Trade and Industry that just left. He was presenting this, unfortunately, to a new minister, and Tito Mboweni was there, actually stubbornly saying, no, we can't accept this. And Enoch Godongwana was the chair of the ETC. And we said, this is not going to deliver. And now we are 5 years into that plan of the Treasury. It hasn't delivered. They may give excuses that probably COVID-19 is the raids in KwaZulu-Natal, insurrection in KwaZulu-Natal, it is the drought and everything. All those excuses are not going to fly in the face of a failing economy. The sad part is this, that I've been working and analyzing the statistics on the census. And you know, a census is a time machine. And it tells you the true story around the momentum and direction of where the country is going. I've been observing from the first census of 96 that I ran, the 2001 one, and the 2011 that I last ran. Those censuses are consistent with the census of 2022. Another subject. Don't worry about the critiques that say census 2022 is not fit for use. They are talking nonsense. The census is consistent. Now, what is coming out of this 3-4 series of censuses? It's a very terrible story around intergenerational value. It is telling a harrowing story for the 90% of the population. As for blacks and coloreds, there's no intergenerational value that is being created. And you see it in the census in terms of the decline, almost a monotonic decline. And then you see it in their skill level as a proportion of themselves by race. So amongst the coloreds and the blacks, they are stuck in the 1994 regiment of skill, which confined them to no more than 20%. Amongst whites and Indians, they are 3 times what the blacks are. So we could be living in Korea today for whites and Indians, and for the rest of the blacks and everybody, and particularly for those who are 25 to 34, their percentage, which was 17%, has declined to 14%. So from a macroeconomic policy perspective, and the conservative macroeconomic perspectives that we have presided over, there is trouble. However, there was a moment of glory from 2001 to 2008 up to about 2009, where indeed the country was growing at 6%, 5% on average. Gross fixed capital formation was standing at 24% of GDP. Of course, one will say we are preparing for the stadia. But in South Africa, we are having a problem of stadia every year, of World Cup every year. So we can actually do gross fixed capital formation at that level or even higher, because South Africa has this development concern. What is happening with the government of national unity, where now they are picking those, transport, electricity and the like, I mean, it's a super corruption, because they are not focusing on the targets that have to be achieved. They are focusing on projects. When you bring people, when we have a systemic and an existential threat, and you point them to targets, they'll look at the money, and they are not going to look at the targets that we desire. Projects are terrible in a period of crisis. What you need is to look at targets. Business, to their credit, came to government in 2020 to say, this is what we would like to do, and these are the targets that we should meet. I believe, for Tito's sake, we need to go back to those targets that business came with, and then say, government, how are we making sure that these targets are met? Not on looking at how can we go to projects. If we agree on targets, then we have a consensus for the country, because those targets match what we actually presented at the 2019 ETC meeting that Tito rejected. And those targets were modeled, they are based on the laws of motion of the economy, and they matched, they had a spitting distance between that and those of business. But the path is the most important thing, not projects. So for Tito's sake, I would argue that we need to go back to that in order to have course correction in our land of disorder.
Dr. Pali Lehohla, thank you so much for your time. They are our former statistician general.